Hello everyone, this is TJ Presley. This is my Module 13 case study, A Good Teacher Turns Bad. So for a summary, Mrs. Horton, an experienced teacher and former Teacher of the Year award recipient, has been having issues at work. A recent separation with her husband has left her to raise her two teenage boys on her own. She has been arriving late to work frequently, refuses to meet with parents, and has been arguing with other teachers that do not agree with her suggestions. The principal, Mrs. Wilson, has received several complaints regarding Mrs. Horton and her behavior in the classroom. Allegations claim she has been verbally abusive to students. One particular parent, Mr. Stafford, wants to transfer his daughter into a different first grade classroom. A parent-teacher conference with Mrs. Wilson, Mrs. Horton, and Mr. Stafford present was cut short when Mrs. Horton slammed her hand on the table and shouted, "You're a liar," to Mr. Stafford. Category 1, problem identification and analysis. So what do we know about this case? The first thing we know is Mrs. Horton and her husband have separated. Mrs. Horton has been arguing with other teachers and gets upset when others disagree with her. Mrs. Wilson has received several complaints regarding Mrs. Horton's behavior in the classroom. And Mr. Stafford wants his daughter to transfer to a different first grade classroom. What do we need to know about this case? The first thing is, why is Mrs. Horton frequently late to work? Why is she refusing to schedule parent meetings? Are the student allegations true? And what are the district policies for misconduct? So, after all that said, the problem is a change in Mrs. Horton's behavior is affecting her performance and relationships at work. Category 2, proposed plan of action with appropriate strategies for implementation. Plan of action. Put together 4 steps. The first step is meeting with Mrs. Horton. First thing I need to do in this particular meeting is address the behavior during the parent-teacher conference. Obviously, as we read in the information provided, her behavior during that parent-teacher conference was nowhere near professional. She was unprepared. She's been refusing conferences to begin with, and then to top it off, she accused the teacher of being a liar. I need to know what's going on. So in this meeting, I'm hoping that Mrs. Horton will open up to me and share with me some things that are going on outside of work. If that's the case, that's affecting her performance at work, I just need to know what's going on and where we need to go from there to fix it. The last thing I want to discuss with Mrs. Horton in this meeting is our steps moving forward. So along with this, whether or not these allegations are true, somewhere along the line it must be partially true, I would say, and maybe some professional development needs to take place. So whether that be some more professional development on communication to help her with her communication with students and parents, and her faculty as well. She hasn't been getting along with her coworkers. Or maybe it's time management or organizational skills to help her get back on track. The second step in this plan of action is to meet with Julie, and that's the student that's involved with this, the daughter of Mr. Stafford. So in this meeting, I need to ask her, are these allegations true? I need to figure this out. Is what she says going on in the classroom? Next thing I want to know is if there's something else that's making her feel this way. Is there something going on at home? Is there something going on the playground, on their bus ride home? I need to know what's going on with Julie to make sure that we know how to proceed with this case. The third step is to meet with other students in the class. Obviously, Julie's not the only one in that class. If this is indeed going on, someone's going to see something or someone's going to have heard something. I need to know what's going on from the other students. The fourth step, I need to follow up with Mr. Stafford. Mr. Stafford was obviously the one that was involved in the meeting and the altercation with Mrs. Horton, so I need to meet with him and follow up and let him know what we've done to proceed with this particular problem. So strategies for implementation. For starters, with Mrs. Horton, I need to be clear with my expectations, and I also need to assure her that she will be supported during this time. This is a pretty tough situation for her. Obviously, she has a lot going on at outside of work and also at work. I just want her to know that we're all on the same team, and I'm here to support her during this time. With Julie and the other students, I need to be compassionate and make sure they know how much I care. We're talking about kids here. These are first grade students. It can be pretty difficult for a first grade student to to go to a principal or to go to their parents and let them know what's going on at school. So I just want them to know how much I care about them and how serious I'm taking this action. And finally, with Mr. Stafford, we've got a very concerned parent here. I need to be actionable. I also need to communicate, the progress that I've accomplished and what's going on with this particular situation. Category 3, resolve the issues based on promoting the success of all students. So what's best for the students? In my opinion, I think keeping Julie in the same classroom is best for the students. If you move one student, you open yourself up to moving others in the future. Who knows what would happen, that domino effect. You move this one time, how many other parents are going to come forward and say, hey, move my kid for this other reason? It could open up a whole can of worms there. The next thing is practicing overcoming adversity. I talk about this in my own classes now with junior high kids, and you don't necessarily have to like your teacher, you don't have to necessarily like your boss, you don't have to necessarily like your coworker someday, but we all need to be professional and get a certain job done. So this is a perfect opportunity for a little girl, even at the first grade, to practice overcoming some adversity. Also best for students is for me as a principal to be more present in Mrs. Horton's classroom. I think it provides extra security for students. It also adds a little bit more support for Mrs. Horton. I hope she views it that way, as it is support and not for me to catch her doing something bad and reprimand her for that. Frequent check-ins with the students in the classroom. This is just a good way to ensure that behavior has improved and morale is restored. Category 4, debrief the problem by reflecting on what you were thinking, feeling, and valuing, and by identifying issues that are unresolved or open to further investigation. So for starters with thinking, as a parent, I was kind of wondering how I would feel if my child felt this way. I think it'd be very concerning for me if my kid came home. I am the parent of 2 kids. If one of them came home and said, hey, my teacher's talking to me this way, I don't feel safe there, I don't want to go back, it makes me feel sick, I don't want to do it. I'm just kind of wondering how I would respond to that as a parent. Second thing is, there's something else making Julie feel this way. Brought this up before, but this whole time I'm reading this situation, I'm thinking, okay, is it just what's going on in the classroom, or is there something going on with Julie maybe at home, again, maybe on the bus ride home, or out on the playground with some classmates? How was I feeling? The first feeling that I had was empathetic, because as a kid, my parents went through a divorce. I know the feeling that I felt. I can only imagine what it would feel like if you were in it as a husband or wife and had to go through that, then be left to raise 2 kids on your own. I can imagine that would be very, very stressful and not be easy to deal with. I also felt angry, as I thought the parents didn't really give Mrs. Horton a fair shot. They immediately jumped to conclusions, wanted to move Julie out to a different class. And I didn't really think it was fair to Mrs. Horton that a meeting didn't take place and proper steps didn't take place before that was about to happen. Valuing, one thing that really stood out to me in this case is I really value hard work and professionalism. I really appreciated, Mrs. Horton's background, prior teacher of the year, very impressive, but then, had this downhill skid. So, I really hope that Mrs. Horton can recover from this and get back on the right track. Last thing was respect. As far as value, respect is a very big deal for me, and it seemed like all the way around in this particular case, there was a lot of disrespect going on amongst peers, amongst students, amongst faculty. It was just a lot of things going on, especially with parents, as we know from the last parent-teacher conference. So unresolved issues and further discussion. A couple of things that stood out to me for Mrs. Wilson was more from an awareness standpoint. I didn't think she really gave Mrs. Horton a fair opportunity to be prepared for this. I know it was just what sounded like was a few minutes early when they popped in, but for someone that has a lot on their plate and has been apparently showing up late to work all the time, I think I'd have more awareness knowing that, hey, they could probably use an extra minute or 2 to be prepared for this meeting. Also for Mrs. Wilson is, why were several complaints filed before observation started. I think I'd be a little bit more proactive in this case and jump on it, get in the classroom earlier, especially after the first complaint. I wouldn't wait till 4 or 5 of them rolled in. And she also knew Mrs. Horton was having some issues, so why not check in over summer break? We all appreciate summer break and being checked out of school, so to speak, but this is your team. These are the people you work with. Why not check in and see how she's doing? Mrs. Horton, for her, I think some unresolved issues or something that she should discuss is seeking some counseling outside of work. I don't know what that really looks like. I've never had counseling myself, but I think in this case, clearly she has a lot going on. I think it'd be good for her to talk to somebody about it. Also discussing options with the school district, maybe a leave of absence if this, continues to become a problem, where she's maybe coping well, but maybe not ready to come back to work, and she realizes that maybe a leave of absence would be an option for her. For Julie and the other students, one thing that really came to my mind is, does Julie have other problems outside of the classroom? We talked about that. But the last thing, really, why didn't the students feel like they were able to go directly to the principal or the counselor themselves? They had obviously something going on. Why did they wait to go home to tell their parents? Why didn't they feel safe enough to go to the principal? Category 5, reflect on standard 2 by providing evidence that you as an educational leader promotes the academic success and personal well-being of every student by enhancing instructional capacity. So, how did I promote the academic success of every student? By providing professional development opportunities for Mrs. Horton. For me, I think that improves her communication skills with the students, parents, and faculty. And it also could improve her organizational skills and time management, basically getting her back on track to where she was before this year. Making frequent observations in Mrs. Horton's classroom and providing feedback. So this is ensuring that communication instruction is improving, also providing additional security for all the students. Last thing is opening lines of communication between administrators, teachers, students, and parents. Obviously, this creates a safe learning environment, which really promotes academic success for every student. Personal well-being of every student. Taking proper steps to resolve issues in the classroom. That's really a big one. Trying to get Mrs. Horton steered back on the right path. Looking out for their best interests for the students. Opening lines of communication within the school. Okay, these kids need to know that they can go directly to the principal or the counselor. They don't need to, it's good that they're going home, but they need to know that they have other resources here at the school as well. And then obviously for the personal well-being of every student is being compassionate and letting them know that all these concerns are taken very seriously. Enhancing instructional capacity, professional development for Mrs. Horton. She's going to continue to grow as a communicator and educational professional. Also restored parent-teacher relationships. So resolving the classroom issues will build trust with the parents. And finally, restoring a safe learning environment for all students. Teacher-student relationship is healthy and vital to student success. So that's it for my Module 13 case study. Thanks for listening.